Here we have an overview drawing of photosynthesis. So I would pause the video here, go ahead and get this drawn in your notebook, add color and all of the labels, and then we'll walk through. I'm going to proceed left to right for the most part. So on the left, what we have is a zoomed in image of some cells on a leaf. It kind of looks like a flower, but indeed these are individual cells. These are called guard cells, and on there you're seeing some chloroplasts. Those are surrounded by some epidermal cells, which are similar to skin cells. Guard cells, when they fill up with water, tend to open up, enabling gas exchange for plants. If there's less water in the plant, the guard cells will deflate, causing this opening to close. This opening is called a stomata or stoma, and this is where gas exchange is regulated for plants. They also tend to lose water here. We call that transpiration. In terms of photosynthesis, through the stomata is where carbon dioxide will enter and oxygen will leave as the reactant of CO2 comes in and the product of O2 leaves. Now if we take one of these chloroplasts and zoom in, I've drawn it right here in the center, and we're going to take a look at how the chloroplast will make photosynthesis happen. I've split it in half, although these reactions, the two sets of reactions that we're going to discuss, happen all over the place inside of the chloroplast. So as the sun sends photons of light toward the earth, there are pigments inside the chloroplast that can capture some of that energy. So let's break this down a little bit. We have the chloroplast membrane, the outer membrane. Now the chloroplast actually has two membranes, but we're going to focus on what's happening on the inside. Here we have these stacks of flattened sacs called thylakoids. These are membranous sacs that are built just like a cell membrane with phospholipids and proteins. The stack of these thylakoids is called a granum. Embedded within the membrane of these thylakoids is a bunch of chlorophyll, the main pigment of plants. As the plant absorbs water through its roots and photons strike the thylakoids, the energy used from the sun as well as a water-splitting enzyme can split water. The release of that water is oxygen, which is one of the products of photosynthesis. This all happens in the thylakoid membranes, and they're called the light reactions or light-dependent reactions. As part of this, when water gets split, hydrogen ions, or H pluses, are pumped into the middle of each of these thylakoids, and electrons are split off and sent down what's called an electron transport chain, all designed to recharge these energetic molecules into useful forms. So ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, and NADPH. These two molecules will then be shuttled out of the light reactions, out of the thylakoid membrane, into the center or surrounding the thylakoids in a syrup called the stroma, and these will be used to run the Calvin cycle or the dark reactions, also known as the light-independent reactions. Here, carbon dioxide will enter again through the stomata, and the carbons are basically stripped off of these CO2 molecules and attached to some pre-existing precursor molecules in the Calvin cycle. But this process requires the use of some energy in order to build these molecules. Lots of ATP and NADPH are used to build, ultimately, molecules such as glucose or other organic compounds. But this is a cycle, and so those molecules that don't become part of glucose are recycled in the system so that they can continue the cycle. The used up ATP and NADPH are changed into NADP plus and ADP and a phosphate, which will then be recharged by the light reactions. This process of taking an inorganic carbon out of carbon dioxide and building a glucose molecule is known as carbon fixation. If we trace the carbons, CO2, this carbon that is inorganic, will then ultimately become part of the organic glucose molecule. And if we look up here on the top right of our photosynthesis equation, we'll see 6 waters and 6 carbon dioxides are our reactants, which make the products of glucose, C6H12O6, and 6 oxygens. The oxygen from the water ultimately becomes the oxygen that's released by the plant, and the carbon in the carbon dioxide becomes part of the glucose that the plant will then use. Here's a glucose molecule blown up, if you will. Notice it has a very geometric shape. This glucose molecule will be used by the plant to build more leaves, stems, roots, or be used as an energy source. I want you to remember that the water comes in through the roots. The plant will extract that from the soil, and it travels up through the plant. It can be lost also through the stomata. That's called transpiration. CO2 gets absorbed, O2 gets released, all through the stomata. And then down here, I just have a little visual, if you will, for ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate. It's an adenosine molecule attached to 3 phosphate molecules. And this is kind of like the charged battery. When the energy in this molecule is used, we have ADP, or the used battery. But this can get recycled or recharged. And then over here, I just have a simple picture of a chloroplast showing the thylakoid membrane, or the thylakoids in stacks called grana, and then the solution covering all of these are the stroma. So spend a little time with this picture so that you can better understand an overview of photosynthesis.